We have breaking news coming in from Sri Lanka. Now the president of Sri Lanka has revoked the state of emergency. The Sri Lankan president revoking the public emergency days after it was imposed to curb the protests that hit the nation. Remember, Sri Lanka is witnessing its worst economic crisis in decades, and now the president of Sri Lanka has revoked the state of emergency. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's ruling coalition, remember, lost its majority in parliament after at least 41 lawmakers walked out of the alliance amid growing unrest over an economic crisis, as well as the Sri Lankan opposition dismissing president's invitation to join a unity government. There's several political developments happening in Sri Lanka over the economic crisis that it is currently facing. The latest news that we're getting to right now on the broadcast, that the president of Sri Lanka has revoked the state of emergency. Sri Lankan president revoking the emergency rule ordinance that had gone into effect from April 1st, even as the government struggled to quell the protests amid the nation's worst economic crisis in decades. Joining me on the broadcast is my colleague Samiksha. Samiksha, what more can you tell us?
The Sri Lankan president has revoked the state of emergency, which was imposed on April 1st. Now, let me give you a backdrop to all of this. There have been a lot of protests that have been taking place across the country, and that is primarily because of the economic crisis that the country has been reeling over the past few months. And this is also because of the lack of foreign exchange. This is also because the Sri Lankan government has announced a lot of tax cuts lately, primarily during the pandemic time, which has led to a lot of fuel shortage, as well as power cuts, which has led to a lot of people facing power cuts which have lasted for almost 13 hours in a day. All of this is happening at a time when Sri Lanka is facing a crisis it has never faced before. In fact, this economic crisis has also now spiraled into a political turmoil as well, with many of the cabinet ministers of the Sri Lankan president also having resigned. Also, remember, what we are told is now the state of emergency, which has now been revoked, comes in the backdrop of a lot of protests, as I just mentioned, that have been taking place outside the Sri Lankan president's house as well. So this essentially gave a lot of the state of emergency, essentially gave a lot of power to the army, and that is when a lot of protests were also happening. So in the backdrop of all this, the Sri Lankan president has finally revoked the state of emergency. It remains to be seen how this really pans out and if there's any relief that comes in for the Sri Lankan country. Back to you.
President Samiksha, we continue tracking all the latest developments in Sri Lanka, as well as a group of Sri Lankan governing party lawmakers also called on Tuesday for the appointment of an interim government, warning that a failure to